The Free Range Texan Network, with the Free Range Texan YouTube channel, the Free Range Texan blog with its articles and photographs of our Free Range Texan friends and guests, the Free Range Texan Facebook page, Free Range Texan News Network with its special reports, and our website at freerangetexan.net. The worldwide Free Range Texan podcast of the month. Always rolling out on the first day of each month, just after dark, Texas time. Subscribe to the Free Range Texan podcast of the month. Taking our bite out of the podcast world. The following is an A-Team PR production.
Welcome to the Free Range Texan podcast. We're kind of an escape hatch for everyday life. We know today's world has issues. Maybe that's just all the more reason to spend some time. So saddle up with a bunch of Free Range Texans. Here's one now. Our host, Michael Shawn.
Foxy, leave the delivery guy alone. Nothing but the highest state of security here at the fabulous A-Team PR studios here in Studio A, located out yonder. And yes, you heard some things at the beginning of this podcast. There are big changes in the wind for us here at Free Range Texan. They're all good. Free Range Texan episode 49 with wheels up and full throttle. And we have a show with a number of things that you've probably not heard before. As I looked over the show notes of this episode, it occurred to me that each segment of our podcast gets more and more intriguing. We've got just a snippet of Roger Dykes' new podcast. It'll not only make you think, but it'll also make you grin. Have y'all heard about the skeletal remains of a huge giant that they've dug up down on a ranch near Post, Texas? Joe Taylor from the Mount Blanco Museum and Research Center will be here to fill us in. Joe Taylor's known all around the world, you know. He's a real live Indiana Jones. And he's agreed to come on the show. Foxy the Wonder Dog is at attention and in charge of security as usual here. And Michael Shawn's Campfire is waiting at the end of episode 49 with a true story about Texas Ranger Mike Bennett. It's one you'll want to hear. So let's saddle up and get ready to ride. Take some time for yourself with the best little podcast in Texas. Bring a friend and ride with the Free Range Texan podcast. We thought it would be a great idea to share some information with you about our friend, Roger Dykes. Now, regular listeners of the Free Range Texan podcast will just know immediately who we're talking about because Roger is always dipping in and out of our podcast one way or another because he's a tremendously interesting guy. And the fact is, most of you may not know, but let me tell you briefly, quickly, he is a full-on quadriplegic in that he has been dealing with cerebral palsy since the day he was born. So he has spent his lifetime in a wheelchair and not really able to use his arms and legs. And along with that come all of the things plagued by a lifetime of learning how to live differently. Roger is one of the sharpest people I've ever met. And when you get around Roger and you get to know him and hang out with him a little bit, you just forget about all of this disability thing. I mean, there is a great guy in there, and he's got a really funny sense of humor. Roger has been, among other things, a on-stage comedian, working in everything from church groups to nightclubs and everything in between. He's been an after-dinner speaker, and the guy is fun. But throughout everything that he does, he has a message. And that message is for people all over the United States, but particularly the people in Austin, here in Texas. And so the more you learn about Roger, the more you will learn about his message. And we thought we would just give you a little snippet of Roger's podcast here on the Free Range Texan. It goes something like this. I think we should tell the people and give them a clear vision of what is happening here. Roger and I are actually at separate locations. It's okay if I tell them that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, we'll let them in on that little.
And the only reason why that's important to point out is that you have to understand that we are at different locations and we're talking at Zoom, and so I can see Roger, but for all Roger knows, I'm sitting here in a Batman T-shirt because my camera doesn't work.
And we can also add that he's too cheap to fix it.
We've talked about you and related to some humorous anecdotes of some type or another in your life, and the fact that you have worked professionally as a comedian. Not only that, but an after-dinner speaker. How does humor that you are disabled and in a wheelchair, and the fact that you are a quadriplegic, yet you use humor to deal with your disability, and has it always had a positive response when you've done that?
Well, it generally has a positive response over time. Initially, people are a little taken back with the idea of someone making fun of disability, even if it's mine, because we live in a society that is very politically correct and very much you do not make fun of different aspects of individuals, be it their race, their religion, or whatever.
Politically incorrect.
I would be most definitely politically incorrect because a lot of people, and there are people who are turned off by that and think it's wrong for me to do it. So they don't do anything.
All right, let's bring that into perspective for just a minute here.
All right.
You have been introduced in a comedy nightclub atmosphere, and you rolled out onto stage. What was their immediate response?
Dressed in a yellow tuxedo with a sequin vest, the first thought was, he dresses well. But after we got past that, I would usually I always began my routine with current event humor or people in the audience humor to get them used to laughing. Because if I started with what I call the wheelchair jokes, they didn't laugh. because they weren't sure they were supposed to laugh.
So you could just hear crickets at a certain point.
You would hear crickets. I've had friends in the past who are so
like
well. I start off by getting you familiar with me that I'm funny. Hopefully you find me funny. Hopefully they find me funny. We do jokes about innocuous things, and then gradually we would get into.
All right, now wait a minute here. I'm going to put you on the spot. A joke about an innocuous thing. Would you give us an example?
Well, an innocuous thing is I did one earlier about you and your cheapness on not having a camera in your computer. Thinking about something you've never thought about before.
And ultimately, that message is in this podcast as well.
Right. The message we want to get across is that we have issues, we have problems, we're people. We're normal people in an abnormal situation.
All right. I'm going to jerk you back for just a moment. You're on stage.
Please be careful.
You've done the innocuous jokes. You've broken the ice with your audience, and you're going to roll into some wheelchair stuff. Can you give us an example or two or three of the type of things that you would do? And I know from having been in the entertainment industry that is hard to do. People find out that you're on the radio and they'll go, well, say something. Do the weather for me. You know, and
right.
It's kind of ridiculous, you know, what people will ask you to do. But I'm asking you to do that now. Can you give us an example of some of your wheelchair-like humor, understanding that our studio audience here on this end is not where you're at, but we may need laugh tracks on this show.
I used to beg for laugh tracks.
Okay. Well, can you give us an example of some of your wheelchair humor? How does that work?
Well, one of the things I would talk about would be the situation I had in gaining romantic relationships. It's much more challenging.
Oh my!
To have a romantic relationship when you're in a wheelchair. I know this one. I invited this one girl out for a date, and she stood me up, and I fell over, and she stood me up again, and I fell over, and it was on that particular night I found out how painful romance can really be.
Oh, Roger. And so, my friends, episode 5 is up right now of Roger Dykes, Just Sayin'. And now, once again, it's time for another free-range Texan Unexplained File. On our Unexplained Files, we have a special guest, my friend, Joe Taylor. And Joe, welcome to the Free Range Texan Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It is always so interesting when you come on here. While you are free to talk about anything you like, sir, the real reason that we reached out and contacted you is we began to see in social media and in different places, we began to read about a really interesting thing that has taken place here in West Texas. So we've done shows about giants, and we're talking about giant human beings. But when one hits close to home, we like to bring it up. Can you kind of begin the story and tell everyone else what I'm talking about here?
Well, giants fascinate everybody because they're people, and we're more interested in people of every kind and any kind than anything else. And, you know, we love T-Rexes, we love Corvettes and all that sort of stuff in art, but we're more interested in people.
Now, Joe, you realize, Joe, that a lot of people think that maybe that's a little bit hogwash, and you're fixing to maybe try to tie it in with Bigfoot or something like that. But that's not what we're talking about here, right?
No, the people have known about giants forever. Some of the histories of other countries are based on giants. Some of the flags over in somewhere over there in Europe has a small arm and a large arm, and it has to do with this giant that used to control the ferry that went across a river, and if he didn't like you, he cut your right arm off. But everybody knows about David and Goliath. Everybody knows that there's talk about that. Most of them don't know much about the biblical Nephilim over there in Genesis 6. They were fathered by the fallen sons of God and human women. That's where the real controversy comes in, at least with Christians. Some would say, well, an angel can't marry a woman, they can't have children by a woman. And others say, well, that's what they did. Either way, whatever you think, there were giant men, and they were so wicked that God destroyed the earth in a flood, if you want to read the Bible. And after that, when the Israelites, God said, here, go into Canaan, I give you the land.
With all due respect, sir, we have a generation of people who are not holding the Bible up as the true Word of God, and we're sorry to have to say that. We have, I know, at this point, listeners that are saying, well, I was just beginning to believe in some of the Bible stories. For instance, the story of Noah and the flood, and now here comes Joe Taylor saying that, well, not only was there a flood, but one of the reasons why is because there were giants, and we had to do something about the giants.
That's my belief, yes, and many others. It's a point of controversy, but when you dig up a 12-foot tall man or an 18-foot tall man here in Texas and so on, and you read the story of Goliath, and you find that there really was a place over there, and there really was a guy named Goliath, it's not it's not a controversy anymore. You've got the bones. Mm-hmm. You can believe whatever you want to about them, and people discount the Bible. I don't care. Man, I was in Hollywood out there. I was in New York City around all those atheists and hippies and everybody else, and the evolutionists and the paleontological world. I've heard all this stuff 1,000 times.
Well, we have established on this show that giants existed, and that we have told stories and had people come on, including you, talking about the existence of real giants remains that have been found here in the United States and, like you say, in Texas. But there is one particular incident down near Post, Texas, in Garza County, which, for you people who don't know, that's here in West Texas. It's just off the Cap Rock, and there is a rancher down there that some years ago began to dig up something like he had never dreamed that he would see. Can you tell us that story?
Well, I got a call about 20 years ago from an old cowboy, and he said, hey, I'm going to tell you my story. We turned the recorder on, and he told this story. I guess he was the one that found the first bones, got somebody to come in and help him, and they dug up a man 12 feet tall.
Wow.
Which is, that is not a guy that got a lot of vitamins and good food. That's something else, okay? But more than that, there was a man 3 feet tall, not a kid, but a man 3 feet tall buried with him.
Holy smoke. The first thing you think of when you hear that is, gee whiz, it's a circus act,
Well, why was he carrying this little 3 foot tall guy around with him? Maybe he could chase the rabbits down and so they could eat. I don't know. There are 3 instances of that I know of. There have been thousands of these things found, thousands of giants found. There's something to this. Why would they be traveling around with these little giants? I mean, these little men. I can't quote you a source on it, and my files are extensive, and because of all this computer junk that's happened in the last few years, where a lot of that stuff is hard to get to.
That's all right. Tell us what you think.
I think that there were a lot of these guys that came through West Texas, all the way from South Texas up into over by Seymour, maybe further over, all the way over to New Mexico. And every so often one would die or get killed or something, and there had to be someone there to bury them. You know, a 12-foot tall man, unless he digs his own grave, has got to have someone about that size dig his grave for him. Who dug the grave, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there are two of these out here in West Texas that I know of, and the tallest one I've ever heard of is over in Seymour. And maybe they got drowned in a flood, but they didn't get drowned in a flood down there at Post, Texas. That was up on some kind of a hill or something. So it was a burial. We know what happened to the bones, and I'm not going to put that out yet because we're researching. We're trying to find more out about that. We know that they were displayed for a while. Something tragic happened to them. In fact,
can you tell us about that?
Yeah, where they were displayed was somebody came in and vandalized the display. If you go back, you know, nowadays you could expect that to happen. They're vandalizing everything. But you go back 20, 30, 40 years ago, nobody, not anybody in West Texas would ever go into a museum or a display or a store and vandalize anything. They just wouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. So
I've said, and I'm probably maybe should be careful, but I said somebody or something destroyed that, and leave it up to your imagination what the thing might be. But there's more going to come out on this story once we confirm some of our research, and it's going to be, well, we're going to have a conference here on July 18th and 19th, and we're going to talk. I'm going to play part of the tape, 17th and 18th. I'm going to play part of that conversation, and I've gotten together a research team. We're going to try to track this thing down. You got to have some in crowds sometimes where you get into some sources.
Now, when you say track this thing down, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean, you're not talking about tracking down the giant. You're talking about part of the story here.
The story of the giant. There's a possibility that those bones are somewhere, and we're going to see if there's any way we can find out where they are. You don't need much. One finger bone, part of a limb bone, part of a jaw. You don't need much. Those things all have a relationship to the rest of the body. So
they didn't just vandalize the museum. They stole the bones.
Was it stolen? Was it destroyed? Just turned to dust? Was it put away somewhere for future work? Or was it so damaged that they couldn't do anything with it? If you know anything about fossil bones, especially here in West Texas, if you dig up a human fossil, they're really pretty fragile, and most of them get destroyed because the guys that dig them up just don't know how to handle them.
Right.
You've got to harden them as you go. So if you dropped, say, a finger bone or a toe bone or an arm bone, it would probably shatter, and most people wouldn't be able to get it back together. And I can. I put the almost awful stuff back together you've ever seen, stuff that I worked on a mammoth one time down around Colorado City. And so I'm digging around there, and I'm brushing away this powdery dirt. All of a sudden I go, why is that powdery dirt right here? And I realize, oh, my gosh, that is a vertebra. It is absolutely turned to dust. So I hardened it up, found out where the perimeters of it were, hardened it up, and we got that out as hard dust. But we got it. But, you know, most of these bones, they shatter. And old museum curators didn't have the techniques we have today to fix stuff. So we've got a research team that we think can open some doors, and for protection of the rancher family, I can only tell so much. But when we get the whole story, I'm telling you, there's a component to this. It's kind of hair raising. And
can you talk about that just a little bit? Give us some idea what you're talking about.
Well, the Book of Enoch, which a lot of people don't accept in Christendom, the Book of Enoch claims that God told the archangels when they came to him and said, "Look what the fallen angels are doing down there." I'm paraphrasing. And God told, when those giants die, their flesh will not be judged, but their spirits will roam the earth as demons. Again,
wow,
either or not. There's a lot to verify that some of these demonic spirits are the spirits of dead giants. And I know that's too weird for most people, but, you can check it out.
That absolutely blows my mind. That is a remarkable statement. Yet, if you know biblical scriptures at all, even right on through biblical prophecy, there is something about that makes sense, dare I say.
Well, when I was in California out there during the 60s and 70s, and was very much involved in the Jesus movement, the anti-hippie movement, and all that. And the occult was a very big part of the 70s, late 60s and 70s, occult religions, demonism, praying to five-pointed stars and stuff like that. There was a lot of that going on. So if you were awake, it seems to fit the demonic thing. If the spirit is a spirit of a dead giant, well, giants are more powerful. They're a lot bigger than we are, so they had a lot more power. So that if it's true that their spirits roam the earth as demons, then that fits what I saw in California. Say I'm wrong or right, but that's what we saw.
Well, and I was just fixing to say, we started this conversation talking about this giant human being skeleton, not just a person with glandular problems, but a real giant of sorts that was dug up near Post, Texas, and that you have reopened the investigation into, as you are known worldwide as a person who runs these type of digs. You have, of course, and as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, you have your fossil museum there in Crosbyton, right on the square. And I think people come from all over the world, certainly from all kinds of educational institutions, and visit you there, and the displays and the research and the work that you're doing. So when you say, hey, quite possibly there is really a tie-in here, and take it into the spiritual, literally, then it's not something that I think people can just blow off, because you have a mountain of research that backs up what you're talking about.
Well, that would be certainly what I would hope that would be my reputation, that I try to research these things with an open mind. And we all have our biases, and we all have our prejudices. We have our backgrounds and all that. But if you're really a good researcher, you need to address that and go, okay, I need to sort out what I want to believe here from what I'm actually seeing. And have I been wrong in the past? Does this show me I'm wrong, or does it confirm what I thought? So it's hard to be an objective reporter, because you end up looking bad, or if you're not careful, you'll have to eat your words, and words don't taste very good second time around.
Your research team is putting together this meeting that you've got coming up that is open to the public, and where, as I understand it, you are planning to reveal what you're not talking about on this podcast, dadgummit. And and I think that I would like for you to be able to give the time and date and location again, so that our listeners who would choose to attend, particularly if you're here in the West Texas area, we might tell them about that and when that's going to happen.
It's going to happen July 17th and 18th of this year, 2020. It's going to be in Lubbock, Texas, way over there on the west side towards Reese, at a small church who's not afraid of these subjects. They've got a pretty good auditorium there. And I believe that's the Fellowship Church. And it's being hosted by my good friend, Professor Judd Burton, who's a cool guy. And this is our 8th conference on this. So he and I have been to Peru together, done other research. We're doing some more things. He's a good researcher. He's a cool-headed guy. He's an academic. Judd Burton if you want to find out more, I haven't published on my Facebook site yet, on my webpage, but I'll do that. If people want to go to my Facebook site, just Joe Taylor, Facebook, and there's a lot of Joe Taylors out there. You got to go to the one that's me.
Mount Blanco Research Center or anything like that, would that help them find you?
They can go to Mount Blanco, mountblanco.com, which is our website, and get to us from there. My other site, Forbidden Paleontology, and that's on Facebook. We're going to have. That's why we're doing this giant stuff. It's forbidden to talk about all this stuff. The secular people don't want you bringing it up, and a lot of the Christian people are afraid to bring it up. So
that's true.
What we're here for. We're going to bring it up. We're not afraid. Plus, I'm not afraid to do the dirty hands research. Get out in the dirt. Go places that cost me money to go. Sit down with people and talk to them for several hours to find out some stuff. That's a real researcher, at least in our field. And there are several of us doing that. I mean, you would go to foreign countries at our own expense and, sleep on the floor in airports, sleep in the dirt in cars just to get the information. We're not interested.
Oh, man, where do I sign up? Hey, Joe,
sounds great.
In the time that we have left, there's one more thing I want you to bring up because, once again, I'm sitting here thinking, boy, a visit with this guy, Joe Taylor, is never boring, and neither is your line of work. And, gee whiz, we could go on and on about that. You have one of the most interesting lifestyles based out of Mount Blanco Research Center there in Crosbyton, Texas. But you are preparing to open up a higher learning teaching over there at Mount Blanco. Will you tell us about that right quick?
We've decided that we're going to pass on what we know about all this prep work, and which has given us all the information, the inside information on these fossils and what they really do tell us and how they do coordinate with the Bible or whatever. And we're going to open the Mount Blanco School of Paleontology. There'll be applied paleontology. In other words, it won't just be theories. The students will be working with actual bones, working on actual projects, fabulous world-class stuff, and other things. We've got thousands of bones, dozens and dozens of field jackets. We're going to open those things up and show them how to do it properly. So if they want to go from our school to any other museum, any other institution, or if they want to go into business for themselves, we'll show them how to do it properly, make a living at it, what it costs, how you can, but it'll be a hands-on thing. The first thing you got to have is a passion. You got to want to know what is this whole creation versus evolution thing? What's the facts? Secondly, you've got to have an inquiring mind. You want to know stuff. You got to be a hard worker. I don't care if you're handicapped, if you're a girl or a guy. If you've got those things, if you got passion and want to know, you'll be a candidate for the school. And we're going to charge. We're not exactly sure what yet, but it's going to be worth every dime of it. We're going to put the information out while we still can and get all this stuff prepped out. I got some fabulous stuff in the museum in here.
I think you told me when we were talking earlier, you made an interesting statement. You said, if they come and they do this, they will be immediately employable, and there are so many opportunities for them to work with different research societies and universities and so on and so forth.
But there's nobody that can accredit this, as nobody does this. We're the only one.
This from a guy who has spent his life. You too can sleep on the floor at airports. I'm sorry, Joe. I'm just kidding. But
you got to do it. That's all there is to it.
Honestly, I don't know anyone who could explain what your world is about better than you. Like Joe said, if you have the passion, then this is a real opportunity. Do they watch your Mount Blanco website for more information on this, Joe? What do they do?
Yes. Yeah, watch mountblanco.com. Watch my Facebook account. We're going to put the word out, and there won't be very many students. We're not going to take any looky-loos. They got to be fired up and ready to go.
Yeah, all the licky-loos have gone to work in podcasting. Okay, all right, Joe. So let's kind of let's box this up as much as we can here.
Well, I can give you a phone number too before I forget.
Oh yes, do that.
Okay, you can call 806-675-2421 and leave a message. We don't have a lot there, but just it'll tell you this is the School of Paleontology and some other stuff. Leave a message. We'll try to get back to them.
All right, great. So the bottom line here is that as far as this giant human being that has been discovered and dug up there in the post-Texas area, that there is much more to this story that is being revealed right now, and that a large amount of revealing will be done at your aforementioned meeting that we have coming up that's mentioned earlier on the podcast, and also that you have your new school at Mount Blanco that is underway. And I think those are the two big takeaways from our visit here on the Free Range Texan. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right.
Joe Taylor, you are never boring. It is not dull when we get a chance and you spend some time and visit with us on the Free Range Texan. You're the real deal, man.
Good. Well, I'm glad not to be boring.
I love you, brother. Thank you so much for being on the Free Range Texan. And we look forward to having you back before too long.
There's a lot of more cool stuff. I'll be glad to be on.
All right. Adios.
Adios.
Listening to another Free Range Texan Unexplained File. If you would like to get in touch possibly with today's guest, or would like to learn more information about this segment of our Free Range Texan Unexplained File, then go to our website at freerangetexan.net. Digital recording device will travel.
Well, some of them other podcasts are kind of like that newfangled electric pickup over there. Hell, Zeke, you can tell they ain't exactly from around here.
Ride with the locals worldwide. The Free Range Texan Podcast. Hi, this is Michael Shawn. Thanks, Roger Dykes, for sharing this story. You folks get yourself some cowboy coffee there and have a seat at our campfire. He had been a member of those sometimes wild and woolly Texas Rangers for 30 years. During that time, he had seen his share of criminals being brought to justice, and now he thought it might be time to write some of his memoirs down. In that 30 years, he had been responsible for capturing bank robbers, stagecoach bandits, renegade Indians, even a couple of out-and-out murderers. No doubt the readers of the day were familiar with the exploits of Mike Bennett, which rang through the pages of the Texas Ranger history. Unfortunately, fact and fiction often get intertwined, and Mike felt it necessary to sit down and compile an accurate account of his exploits. He intended to set the record straight, including his greatest failure. You see, there was one outlaw named Dan Diego that he was never able to bring to justice. Mike concentrated most of his work on telling the story of how he began tracking this vicious outlaw. The story began down in Del Rio, Texas. Mike was a few miles outside of town when Dan Diego hit the bank. Not only would he take the money from the bank, but he would gun down a teller, the bank president, and 2 small children who were just in the way. This began a manhunt. This time, he was determined to bring the desperado to justice. But the ever-elusive Dan Diego seemed to always slip through his fingers. Like the time Dan Diego knew that Mike Bennett was hot on his trail. In order to avoid being captured or killed, Dan Diego headed into the desert around El Paso. With limited supplies and only half a canteen of water, Diego hoped he would be able to elude capture from the relentless lawman. By the same token, Mike Bennett understood that with limited water and supplies, Diego had little or no chance of escape. So he followed him into the hot, scorching desert. The difference being Bennett was fully prepared with the necessary provisions to track Diego down. Mike Bennett got closer and closer to his prey. Then, one hot, starry night, Dan Diego was roasting a rabbit that he had killed that day. Rabbit was not his favorite food, but his lips trembled as he thought of the first bite. Mike Bennett could see the fire and smelled the rabbit cooking. This time, he thought he had Diego for sure. Mike took out his rifle and, crouching down, slowly moved toward Dan's campfire. Mike cocked the lever on his Winchester. He stood up, pointed directly at the outlaw. Then he shouted, "Hold it right there!" But as his eyes focused on the campground, lo and behold, there was no one there. Once more, somehow, the crafty outlaw had slipped off into the darkness. And so, Mike Bennett's hunt for Dan Diego was to continue. Mike Bennett's memoirs are filled with stories that mirror this one. He seemed forever just to be moments away from capturing this desperado, but each time, Dan Diego slipped away. Now, Mike Bennett had an exemplary career as a Texas Ranger, but he was haunted by the fact that he was never able to bring Dan Diego to justice. In Bennett's final days, he determined that he would tell the world of his quest to capture the infamous Dan Diego. He gave a vivid and detailed account of the many times the two men almost met, including Laredo, Texas. In his never-ending quest to eliminate Dan Diego, Mike had trailed him to the border town of Laredo. It was relatively quiet when Mike rode up Front Street. It was almost noon, and Dan was having a beer in the only saloon that was open in town. From out of nowhere, Mike appeared in the doorway of the saloon. Bennett said, "You've gone far enough, Diego. Now you're coming with me." Diego responded with a grunt and said, "You think you can come in here and just arrest me, Senor Mike? You know, I am a very fast gun, and I can gun you down right here and now. But I would like to make it a fair fight, so all these people in Laredo can witness you trying to draw your pistol on me. I will meet you in the street, and we will decide which one of us will bury the other." Well, the street was cleared, and all the people in town watched from the windows and doors along Front Street. Mike Bennett and Dan Diego came out from opposite ends of the street. They slowly walked toward each other until they were only about 20 paces apart. They stood facing each other. Each appeared to be about to draw. Then, from out of nowhere, came a dust devil, as often happens in dusty West Texas towns. And the dust devil blew right in between them, kicking up dirt and dust from the dusty Laredo street. And then, as the dust settled, Mike Bennett found himself standing alone, wondering what happened to Diego. Once again, fate had blown through and saved Dan Diego from his well-deserved justice. By now, you may be asking yourself, why have I never read of these two Western characters in Texas history? I mean, if you think about it, they must be in the history books because Mike was so determined and Dan was so fortunate as to always escape the relentless Ranger. Well, compadres, let me explain. The memoirs actually exist. The writer intended to set history straight and eliminate all the false narratives related to these two individuals. But the truth is, the memoirs were written by Paul Douglas, the owner of a bookstore. The reason the details were so vivid regarding each man is because Paul Douglas believed he was both men. I know this because the story was related to me by a doctor in charge of Paul Douglas's care at the Blue Mountain Sanitarium in Alpine, Texas. Just another story from our campfire. Adios, my friends. We get going on this free-range Texan podcast. Time really flies. It helps when you enjoy your company. It is always a pleasure to ride with you here on this podcast. We have a lot of great stuff coming up the rest of this year. We've been working on some future things. I think we're really going to enjoy this when we do this. There are big changes in the wind here at Free Range Texan. We're going to be telling you more about that in the days, weeks to come. And don't forget that Roger Dykes Just Sayin podcast. Roger's podcast, episode number 5, is up already. It's a fun listen, and you learn things from Roger. Thank you, Joe Taylor, for being our very special guest on this episode of the Free Range Texan. And dear friends, it's more important than ever before that you go ahead and subscribe to our podcast on whichever podcast player you choose. In part because it's been decided that the Free Range Texan will be moving to a monthly podcast rolling out on the 1st of each month, just after dark, Texas time. Now, if you're interested in the details and why it is so important that you subscribe now on any podcast player you like, go to our blog at freerangetexan.net and check out the article entitled Free Range Texan Podcast of the Month. And that's all the time we have for now. Boy, we're glad you rode with us here on the Free Range Texan Podcast. Take 'em home, sweetie pie.
Thank y'all for listening to the Free Range Texan Podcast, produced at 18PR Studios, out yonder in West Texas, with our host, who's been voted the hardest working man in podcasting, Michael Shawn. Feedback or submissions to our program can be submitted on our website, freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net. This is Sweetie Pie, on behalf of Michael Shawn and the crew here in Studio A, where we're all looking forward to spending time with you on our next episode of the Free Range Texan Podcast. Y'all come back now, you hear?
An 18PR production. End transmission.
That's all. Can we go now, Dad?